Cool. So welcome everyone. This is our very first webinar as the Flight Levels Academy. So welcome to all of you who are joining. I see there are more people still coming in, so we will let them join us as we go. As a result of it being our first time, I'm sure we'll keep asking for feedback in the future. We'd love to get some feedback at the end. So any of you have thoughts on how we can improve, we will have a poll at the end, so you can give us some comments and thoughts on how we can tweak and improve things. And the other thing that I want to mention is that we will be recording this, and the video will be available later on, and we will post it and tweet it out and so on. So yeah, all sounds good. Cool. So I shared a link for Slido. I will post it again now. But basically, that link that I'm sharing now, if you could use that to post your questions, we will be using that as kind of the official set of questions to ask and answer for the course of the agenda of today. Yes. And what else? I was going to explain, I think everybody has more or less figured out how the chat works, but if you haven't found it yet, there's a button just next to the green share button on the right-hand side. You'll see chat. You can type in the chat there, and we can have some conversations if you want to clarify anything and so on. And also, if at any point you would like to kind of raise your hand, there is also a raise hand button that you can see inside the chat. Just tap that and you'll pop up, and we can see what you have to say. Cool. So let's have a look here. We have a couple of questions. Just a note that once the questions are on there, you can also thumbs up them and vote them up. So we have, then we get a sense of what everybody is interested in discussing, and we will go from there. Cool. Awesome. So welcome, Klaus. Thanks for joining us today.
Cool. Yeah, I'm very excited. I haven't done something like this before. Ask me anything, whatever this means. Yeah, let's see how this works actually. Looking very much forward to it. Yeah, so
cool. Yes, we wanted to start off just by getting a sense of where everyone is connecting in from. So Klaus, maybe you can just share the slide that you had, and I will share a link now.
Exactly.
You'll see a pollev.com/Klaus2222. If you follow that link, you'll be able to vote, and we can just get a quick sense of where is everybody in the world. Just click the link in the chat, it'll open in the browser.
That's Bangkok. That's Brazil.
I like the way it animates, it's pretty cool.
Oh, even Australia, look at this.
Wow, we have some people up late, or?
What time is it in Australia? Plus a lot.
Yeah.
Nice.
Excellent. Cool, maybe we can leave it open and...
Exactly.
So 10 p.m. in Australia. Nice.
10 p.m. Okay.
And 8 a.m. in Brazil. So we have almost around the world. Pretty cool.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sweet.
I can just let it open like this.
Yeah. Awesome. Shall we take our first question? We have a bunch of questions that have been submitted. Let me see if I can share this. Cool. I have to turn you off, Klaus, in order for this to work. But
shall I stop sharing?
That's cool.
You know, we figure out how this works as we go.
Cool. So we have a couple of questions here. Shall we just start at the top and we can go from there?
Yeah, there's some votings, right?
Yes.
It's automatically sorted, right?
It is sorted, ranked from most important to bottom of the list.
Okay. All right. So what is the first question?
The first question is, now that I've implemented flight level 2, it turns out that I have many flight level 2 meetings to attend. Do you have any recommendations on how to manage flight level 2 meetings?
I guess for me, it's actually two questions. So one is, there are many meetings, and that's a question in itself, because I guess the whole point behind flight level 2 is that you want to reduce the number of meetings. And then there's the second question, do you have any recommendations of how to manage flight level 2 meetings? So I would somehow, how would I start? Well, is there something like a flight levels architecture actually? Because the whole point behind flight level 2 is that you want to reduce the number of meetings. So I'm skimming through a slide set here. Maybe I can show you what I want to get across. Yeah, so can I also share the screen, or can I share my screen now? How does this work? Mr.
You can just kick me out.
I can do this?
I'll stop and you can start.
There we go. Nice. Okay, so that's one illustration what I see quite often. So this is from this is more or less a dependency chart. So what I tried to do is I tried to map some out the teams. So each box that you see here represents a team, and this one says customer. This means these 4 teams, they are basically working, let's say, on the same product. So the dealer working on the same product, 6 teams here, 2 teams here, 2 teams there, and I guess 12 teams or so here. If we just represent the dependencies, we end up somewhere like this. And the point behind the flight level 2, or not actually only flight level 2, the point behind the entire flight level idea is that we somehow want to, cut through these, this Gordian knot here. So if we just zoom into the dealers, I hope you see this animation. Cliff, you tell me if something is not working, okay? Perfect. So we just zoomed into the dealers, right? So we have 6 dealers here, and these are 6 teams. If we want to coordinate, like we want to manage our dependencies, or whatever, we could join each other in the stand-up meeting. And I think that's what was somehow your question. So dealer team 1 could go to the stand-up meeting of dealer team 2. They could just participate the stand-up meeting. If they also have some coordination with team 3, they join this stand-up meeting, they join the stand-up meeting of team 4, of team 5, of team 6. Then these teams are coordinating. Team 2 joins these stand-up meetings, and so on. And we see that's a problem, right? So, I mean, if you put out a job description, you need to write into the job description, attend stand-up meetings, because that's what you're doing the entire day here, right? So the point behind the flight level 2 is that we somehow try to eliminate this. So we have 6 teams here, and these 6 teams, they are working on the dealer product, right? So the point is we have dependencies between these 6 teams, and what they are doing now is they do not visit each other in the stand-up meeting, but they build another board, like a visual representation where you see all the dependencies and everything. And each of the teams, they send 1 delegate to this dealer stand-up meeting. Does it somehow make sense? So what we see here is dealers, so the teams, these are the flight level 1 system. And because there are so many dependencies between these flight level 1 systems, the teams build a flight level 2 system, right? And you can apply, and now the number of meetings, of course, goes down tremendously because, well, I just sent 1 delegate to this stand-up meeting, then the delegate goes back to the team meeting, and they're having a stand-up meeting here. So with 2 stand-up meetings, I basically manage 6 teams in this case. And we can apply the same idea to the entire organization. So you see that there are multiple flight level 2 systems popping up in the organization now. But now from time to time, let's assume these flight level 2 systems, these are these dark gray boxes here. These are all flight level 2 systems, and they also have dependencies. So I guess now we're getting to your point, right? So for instance, there's a dependency between core experience and customer, core experience and business intelligence. We have all these dependencies. So we could do the same like on the team level. They could attend each other's stand-up meeting and we end up in a huge stand-up meeting mess. Or the representatives of these flight level 2 systems, they build another flight level 2 system. Like I called it here an operational portfolio. And the idea is that we connect these flight level 2 systems to the operational portfolio. And that's the point where, the representatives of the flight level 2 meetings meet here. So in general, it works like this on the team level. You have, or let me put it that way. If this is really like products, you will probably have something like product owners or so working on these flight level 2 systems. And this is basically the board where you see all the dependencies and everything across the products. And yeah, well, the product owners or whoever is interested in it, they are coordinating in front of this board. This would be my answer.
Sounds good.
I don't know.
Mac, who asked that question, would you say that that kind of answers your question? Is there something more behind it maybe you'd like us to dig into? Is Mac on the call?
Is Mac on the call? That's also a good question.
Don't see a Mac on the call, but maybe Mac is a nickname or short for something else.
Yeah.
Cool. Shall we say that that one is answered, and I'm happy to move on. Let's see, what do we have next? While we get started, how much experience do people need in Agile, Scrum, flows, safe, etc., to be able to do flight levels well?
How much experience do people need? Well, I guess the thing that I've just shown, that's something what we call a flight levels architecture. And I think if you have no idea about agility, why it even makes sense to coordinate in a quick loop and stuff like this, I guess it's not a good idea to already start with the flight level architecture. So I think you need solid knowledge about agility and flow-based work if you come up with something like a flight levels architecture, what we've just seen before. I guess if you are a very classical kind of person and you see the flight levels architecture, you probably tend to map out your org chart, but that's exactly not what we want to see, right? So yeah, Cliff, what do you think?
I would say not really a huge amount. I mean, I think it probably will help with some other things, but I wouldn't say that it's directly solving the same set of problems. The way that I think about flight levels is it's trying to get the parts of the organization to interact more than trying to speed up how fast we work in each kind of individual piece of the organization. I don't know if you've ever had this before, but this kind of situation where, you know, you're developing something over here and super fast, but then the marketing team or the people who do the copy or the downstream testing team or the customers themselves or the third-party client is not ready for the thing that you need to do. Those are the kind of problems that we're trying to address with this. And I think that it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be agile or even, you know, trying to be agile. You just want to be able to be kind of more aware of how you're interacting with the different parts of the organization. That's kind of my thought.
Sounds cool.
Yeah. Cool. And that question was asked by Anonymous, so I have no idea who to ask. I will share the questions again in a second. I'm just trying to log back into the system, but yeah. Hopefully that helps to answer some of that about the question. Let me see here. Cool. Next up, we have a similar-ish kind of a question. It says, I'm completely new to flight levels. Is it possible to implement in a company where most of the teams are doing Scrum?
Yes. Yes, totally. So I go back to what I've just showed you before. I share my screen again, okay? If we take a look at this flight levels architecture here, I guess there's another one. Yes. So that's from a real organization actually. And what you see here, all these teams, they are doing Scrum. So all is maybe really a lot, but let's say 90% of these teams. So it's more or less a Scrum organization. So a lot of teams are doing Scrum. And the point is still, this organization is not structured like this, that one team is, no, they are structured like this. One team is most of the time working on one product, but you need multiple teams and they are working on the same product. And the Flight Level 2 system basically is the coordination point of the Scrum meetings. I guess in Scrum, there's something called like the Scrum of Scrums or so. Apologies, I'm not good in Scrum, but I guess there is something like the Scrum of Scrum meetings or something like this. And this is maybe similar. The point here is just, it's not about the meeting. What we are doing is we are visualizing the flow across all these Scrum teams because they need to collaborate. So we are visualizing the flow across the Scrum meetings. We are visualizing the dependencies of the work items. And then, of course, there is coordination also going on. So the short answer is yes. And actually, I would probably say in 80% is always good. In 80% of the cases where I work with organizations on a team level, they are using Scrum as a method. And we are building Flight Level 2 boards where the Scrum teams are coordinating. And I think just as a general answer to this, from the viewpoint of a Flight Level 2 system, I actually don't care about the method on a Flight Level 1. So there could be Scrum teams there. It could be, don't know, they could do Kanban, or they could just work. That's also okay, right? So it's just the coordination point, more or less. Hope that answers the question. You are muted, Mr. Hazell.
It's like web conference and video conference 101, hey? See the mouth moving, but there's no sound. I had to say a couple of people asking for a link to post questions. I've just pasted it again in the channel, and I will now also share. I have a, which also has the link on it. Now you can see the questions as they're being asked. Cool. So I will mark this one as done. Let's have a look and see what do we have here. How do flight levels differ from portfolio and program management? Key differences in the approaches used.
I would say that you need proper portfolio management within flight levels. So I don't think it's so I guess portfolio and program management is part of your flight levels. It depends on where you are doing it. So it's, yeah, Cliff, help me. How does flight levels differ from, I guess you...
I don't necessarily see it as a differing thing.
Yeah.
Like it's not, flight levels is very much more of an and rather than an or. And I think this answers kind of, if you're looking at other methods or, you know, it's not like, do you need flight levels or product managers or flight levels or Scrum or flight levels or program management? It's flight levels and combining these things together, each of these things solve their own specific unique problems. And I guess the question is like, where do you need to use them? So where would you use program or portfolio management? And how can you use flight levels to connect the individual systems together, if that kind of makes sense?
And for me, this portfolio and program management. So a lot of people think that that's flight level 3, but not necessarily. Flight level 3 is about strategy. So when we're talking about the strategic portfolio management or so when there's strategy involved, I would see it on flight level 3. Otherwise, for me, it's flight level 2, because what we are doing is we are coordinating in program or portfolio management. We are coordinating between products, services, projects, maybe. So that's still a task for flight level 2. Yeah, so I would see portfolio or program management is inside flight levels somehow.
Yeah. Cool. Hopefully that answers that question. I will mark that as done. I have a laptop on the side, well, iPad on the side, and I can tick stuff and it updates here. The wonders of modern technology is always awesome. Cool. So we have a next question. What is your take in terms of triage versus cost of delay versus more deep analysis in terms of portfolio management or other level?
Mm-hmm. I guess that's one for you, Cliff. Don't you think so?
I could try to answer this. If I understand the question correctly, I think it's, yeah. If I understand the question, or the way I understand the question is what's the benefit of using sort of a light triage method versus in-depth cost of delay or some kind of deeper analysis for deciding which things to work on? And I would say, or the way that I like to think about this is that it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve in a way. So if you've got 5 or 6 options and you've got a little bit of time, you're just trying to sense, should we actually start investigating this thing and adding some more sort of detail to it? Probably a light kind of a triage makes some sense. If you're going to do something that's much more detailed and you want to spend, sort of 40% of the company's effort over the next 5 years on a project, probably you want to do a little bit more kind of gut feel of like, does this make sense? So I think it's more of a case of a place and time. And I would probably end up using some sort of variation of all of them if it makes sense. So don't just jump in and say, okay, we're only doing triage or only doing cost of delay or only doing deep analysis. I would look at the value that you get from each one and use it in the right place if that helps.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a very good answer, but again, I don't think that it's an either or. I think it's where do we use it? Where is the right place for it rather than.
And especially cost of delay, I guess you need to have quite a lot of certainty if you really want to apply like a cost of delay number behind it. So what is the cost of delay of blockchain? I have no freaking idea. So yeah, maybe for things with a high degree of uncertainty, cost of delay is not the right thing. But if we really know what we are doing, like we are printing stuff kind of, and if we miss some pieces, I can just quantify it quite easily. Yeah. So yeah, as Cliff said, it depends on many things.
Cool. I hope that answered your question. If it doesn't answer the question, please feel free to add a follow-up question and add some more detail or mention something in the chat, and we can try to go a bit deeper. Cool. Just refreshing here to see what I have. A nice question from Anonymous. I don't know anything about flight levels. Why should I start using it and what is it for? And there are a few more people who are also voting on this one.
Yeah. Well, what is it for? I guess I will start with this one. Why should I start using it and what is it for? I guess for me, flight levels is a kind of thinking model. So it's not like a method or it's not like a recipe, just like flightlevels.exe, install it in your organization and everything will be fine kind of thing. For me, it's a thinking model which helps us to a certain extent be aware of what we need to do in an organization if we want to achieve what we want to achieve. So, oh wow, that sounds weird, right? So what is flight levels actually? No. So the point behind it is, so there are 3 flight levels. There's flight level 1, which is the operational level, like teams are working, right? Then we have the flight level 2, and on the flight level 2, that's a coordination between teams and between products and services, because usually, teams work on product services, right? And if there are multiple teams working on the same product or service or on the same deliverable to the customer, it would make sense that they are coordinating. That's what flight level 2 is for. And flight level 3 is for strategy. Strategy means like, okay, are we doing the right stuff kind of thing? And where do we see our organization in the next N years or so? And I think the thinking model is, if we only optimize teams, that's not enough. So whenever we try to optimize something in our organization, we have to think of all these 3 levels. And that's why I would call it a thinking model, actually. Yeah. Cliff, do you have to add something here? So, one more sentence, maybe. So if you want, so the question was, when shall I use it? Well, if you have the problem that you need to coordinate across teams and products, and if you want to operationalize your strategy. That's a very short answer.
Yeah.
Something to add from your side?
I was going to say that there's a couple of really great videos online, because it's sort of maybe a slightly longer explanation. But previous videos, specifically ones of Klaus talking about flight levels. So the talk is called why agile teams have nothing to do with, why agile teams have nothing to do with business agility. I will find a link in a second and share it with you in the chat. But that will give a sort of a more in-depth answer, because there's kind of 3 or 4 main points that I think is kind of useful to consider when you're, when it would be helpful to use flight levels.
Mm.
Cool. Hopefully that answers your question to some extent, and I will give you the video link shortly. Cool. Let's go to the next one. We have, what are typical agenda items in level 2 meetings? Any recommendations on how to structure the discussions among representatives of the teams?
Mm-hmm. Meetings. So I will look at another slide. So let me put it that way. When we are doing a flight levels workshop, so flight levels does not come with a set of meetings actually. So when we're doing a flight levels workshop where we are introducing flight levels, I kind of like to start with something like, okay, what agile meetings do you already know? People start writing down meetings, and we have sprint reviews, we have sprint planning, we have, I don't know, stand-up meetings, retrospectives, replenishment meetings. Usually you get a whole bunch of sticky notes, a sticky note explosion with meetings. So we somehow structure this, and then, we suddenly come to the conclusion, well, it's usually not a lack of meetings. So there's quite a lot of meetings we
Very
know.
rare.
Yeah, there's a lot of actually also agile meetings we know. So the question is more like, okay, can we use these meetings? Can we make use of these meetings? So what I then try to do is, I try to share my screen. Oh, this will stop other screen sharing. Cliff, I kick you out.
That's fine.
What I try to do then is this. I basically ask 4 questions. How do we coordinate in a quick loop? I guess it's really important, especially when it comes to agility, that we have fast feedback loops. So how do we do this? How do we improve? Well, good question, right? Especially when we're talking about continuous learning and so on. How do we decide what to do? Like the decision, what shall we work on? And how do we decide how to do it? So what to do and how to do it. So we have this sticky note explosion with the meetings in the room, and then we somehow try to map, okay, which format do we already know, which format would fit into these 4 questions. Maybe there's another question that's particular for your organization. So I used to work in the aviation industry, for instance. All the time there's the question, what about risk, right? We like when planes are in the air. Most of the time. So maybe you come up with another question, and then we basically map the meetings, and we somehow come up with some ideas what we are going to do. So the point is, we decided in the workshop with the people who are working in the system, there are some guidelines like do it often but short, make decisions and learn. And for each and every meeting, we try to come up with some kind of template that we try to fill out. And that's actually the point where we come to the point like, what is the agenda? So these questions are from my friend Troy McGinnis, and I kind of like it how the questions are, especially the order. So what is the outcome of the meeting? What decisions come out of the meeting, and what information is needed to make this decision? So, and that's basically where we more or less, define what's going on in the flight levels meeting. I hope this answers the question.
Cool. Sounds good. Let me share the questions again. We can have a look and see what we have. Interesting one. Can you compare flight levels and SAFE? SAFE also has multiple levels like team levels, program levels, and portfolio levels as well.
Mm. Well, honestly, I'm not a safe expert, totally not. I've just seen their website. I've seen customers who are doing safe, and I guess there's quite a lot of things you have to do. I mean, there are trains running around, uh, so there are roles, there are responsibilities, there's everything actually somehow, and so there's a lot of definitions and everything, and then you need to implement safe in your organization. That's my understanding. And again, I'm not an expert. So let's talk about flight levels. Flight levels is the thinking model. So we have these three levels. We also have something like activities, like 4 activities. I have somewhere a slide for this, hopefully, which I can share. No, I don't have it. I can just do it with the audio link. And we have 4 activities. Like, it would make sense to visualize your situation. It would make sense to create focus. It makes sense to establish agile interactions and to measure progress and improve the whole thing. So you basically have 3 levels, 4 activities, and that's everything. And that's your starting point, more or less. So what you try to do is, it's not about, I don't know, installing a method, what a smart or not so smart guy came up. It's more like, okay, flight levels helps you think, what are our problems and what do I need to do in order to save these problems, yeah, in order to solve these problems, kind of. So it's more like you build your own framework. So flight level is more or less like a I don't know, building blocks where you build your tailored framework to your specific organization, if this makes any sense. Cliff, do you have something to add here?
Yeah, I think very often what happens is the organizations that I've seen using SAFE have something kind of that they're doing that is somehow already quite complicated and complex. And my preference is for simpler solutions to complex problems. And I think that if we have a scenario where we're having to sort of retrain everybody in the entire organization and sort of touch every single piece of the things that we do, it kind of makes it hard to know which of the problems are worth focusing on. And so what flight levels I think helps with is sort of, before we even considering something about what other methods and tools and what other problems we might have, where should we start and what problems should we solve first? And I think very often that there's sort of 1 or 2 kind of smaller changes that can have very large bang for your buck, if you will. And I've seen this from the organizations that I've worked with, a large amount of impact coming from 1 or 2 very small changes, rather than trying to say, here's what the perfect organization looks like, let's go and make all of these things true. And so, I don't know, I think it's just kind of a different approach. And I prefer one that's sort of a little bit simpler and easier to understand. And that's kind of my preference. But I say this as well, I'm not an expert in SAFE. I'm not an expert in most methods, to be honest. I often tell companies that, I'm not an expert on your company, and really, I think it's kind of dangerous when someone from the outside comes in and says that I know the right way for you to organize and design every piece of your organization. And what we try to do with flight levels is use the vast amount of knowledge that's inside the organization already to build a better understanding of what is currently happening, so that we can make changes based on where we are, rather than trying to think about where we sort of wish we were. Let's understand what's actually happening and respond to that, rather than just kind of making changes for the sake of it. But yeah, that's kind of my thought.
I guess we can make one thing clear. If you are searching for or looking for a clear recipe which tells you do these, I don't know, 25 steps and everything will be fine, flight levels is not the right thing for you. You are allowed to think, but the problem is, if you are allowed to think, you have to think. So it's not a recipe. I'm not smart enough to come up with a recipe which can be used in each and every organization on this planet. Sorry.
Cool. I'm going to mark this one as done, and let's continue on the next one. Have you guys ever faced any shortcomings when implementing flight levels in an organization? And there's one right beneath it which says, what are the first, maybe we take them separately because they're kind of different questions. But the other one is, what are the first steps? So what are the shortcomings or problems you run into when implementing flight levels in an organization?
What are the shortcomings? Well, problems. There's probably many. I tried to somehow sort it out. So, well, if what I've seen actually, but I guess it's not only about flight levels. It's mostly for all changes, I guess. But what I really see when you can really screw it up, then when something like this happens, like top management is like, yes, we want to do flight levels, we want to become agile, do it. It has nothing to do with us. I guess that's really quite hard, because the point behind flight levels, if you really do it like I like to see it, then it affects the entire organization. And of course, you can start somewhere in a smaller part of your organization, but you will always hit a certain ceiling. And if you don't have top management on board, I guess it's really becoming quite hard. The other thing is, we already talked about this a little bit. So it looks quite easy. So we have these 3 levels and everything is fine. And then we have seen this flight levels architecture. Let me share the screen again so that you know the picture that I'm talking about. So that would be the flight levels architecture. And I guess one problem is what we see quite often when people start, let's say, without knowing what they are actually doing, is they take this and they map their org chart into it. So it could be quite easily done. So we have teams in our organization. So that's flight level 1 checked. So teams are somehow organized in, I don't know, groups. So we have our flight level 2. Groups are coordinated in departments. So we have, again, our flight level 2, and then there's a flight level 3 like strategy, and our flight levels architecture is done, and our flight levels implementation. But that's actually not the point. Flight level 2, it's not about the org chart. Especially flight level 2 is about value delivery. It's about products. It's about services. It's about where are you making money with? And we need to put this into focus on a flight level 2. And I guess, yeah, if you ask me for the 2 biggest problems, I would think these are the 2 biggest problems. If this makes sense.
I would just say the most common thing that I've seen people struggling with is that they try to follow the exact organizational structure of what they currently have, which is basically what Klaus is saying. So, we have 5 different teams, and so we build 5 different boards, rather than saying, actually, these 3 teams all build one thing, and those 2 teams plus some of this team actually build some other thing, and let's try to connect those pieces together. Because otherwise, it's a little bit like the analogy I use is, if we try to make each of the teams agile, it's a little bit like speeding really fast in a Ferrari between traffic lights in a traffic jam. You're flying super fast, but then you sit at the next light waiting in the next team's backlog for them to be able to do the thing that you need in order to be able to get this thing out to the customer. And what we're trying to do is turn this a little bit around and say, rather than look at what is the current organizational structure, and we're definitely not even saying you have to change the structure, but let's think about, in order to deliver this value for that customer, we need some of this, some of this, some of this, some of this. How do we coordinate that effort, rather than how do we try to coordinate the teams that currently exist?
Yeah.
And then just one extra thing to add on that is that I really like the way that, and I've said this to a couple of clients that I've worked with, is that you often start out a transformation by like reorganizing the entire company. And that to me is like, it's like using architecture to fix a problem. It's probably one of the most expensive ways to solve any problem. What you actually want to do is you want to say, like, if we build a level 2 system, we don't have to change any reporting lines or any structure. We can build a system over here to coordinate those 5 teams. They can work like that for a while. Probably we learn some things as we do it for a little bit. And then we go, actually, we forgot about this other team that we also need in here. And then maybe down the line, if you decide that it makes sense, which often it may not even be the case, you could consider then changing your structure or reporting lines, or moving the team to sit next to each other physically, or whatever it is. But very often I find that changing the reporting lines I don't know, it doesn't seem to have the effect that usually people are looking for. And so I try to hold off using that until you're absolutely sure that it's actually going to have a positive effect.
It's a very
cool.
good point.
Let's see, we have some more questions. I want to just quickly share this.
Yeah, I've stolen your screen again. Sorry for that.
All good. Here we have our screen again. So that was what steps, where have we gone here? What are the first steps to introduce flight levels?
I have a slide for this.
Maybe you want to take the other one, because what's the first step to start level 2? Yeah. I don't know if this is the same question, but it sounds like they're quite related.
Yeah. Well, actually, as I already said before, I guess the very first point is that we need to understand the context. So it is not context free, kind of. So you really need to understand what this organization is doing. And that's the first step. Then with this understanding, we build a flight levels architecture. Flight levels architecture is a lot what we've already talked about. So it's about what systems do we actually need. So for instance, if you are doing, I don't know, a campaign training, in campaign we know how to build a board. Yeah, if you attend campaign training, you know how to build a board. However, when I come to an organization and I don't know, there are 2,000 people running around, my first question is not how do I build a board? My first question is what boards do I need? So that's the flight level architecture. So if we understand the content, we find out what boards we actually need and how do we connect them together so that we can basically generate value from strategy to operation, more or less. So we connect all these levels together. That's the flight levels architecture. Then we also need to talk about, that's something what we call flight items and flight routes. I know it sounds a little bit made up, but what are the flight items? Flight items is something like work items. So what is the actual work item that I'm managing on what board? So as an example, on the strategy level, hopefully we're not talking about tasks. So what is the work that we're actually talking about on what board that we see in our flight levels architecture? And the flight routes is something like, and how do these flight items, how does work flow or fly over our boards to generate value at the customer? And that's still the first step for me. So that's what we somehow need to figure out in the beginning. So understand the context, build the flight levels architecture, understand what work you're managing on what board and how the work is flying through the boards. Number 4 is define your agile interactions. What are the main agile interactions? We already talked about this, like meetings. What would be main meetings, and not within each board, but to operate the whole, actually. And yeah, then we basically come up with something like a takeoff plan, and how do we make this happen? And takeoff, it's not like a rollout plan, and now we design our waterfall plan, how to become agile. It's more like, okay, the agile change approach. What could be the next, let's say 2-3 steps, then we learn again, and the next steps and the next steps and the next steps. So these are the 5 things actually we're doing when we start with flight levels.
Cool. Hopefully that answers the question. If it hasn't, please shout in the chat or ask a follow-up question and we can try to dig a little bit deeper. I'm going to tick both 2 of these. Awesome. Interesting. Now we want to talk about Spotify. Cool. So then the question, I'm assuming that's directed at me since I was previously at Spotify and it wasn't Klaus. As your previous job, you're a tribe lead at Spotify, and I would like to know how you keep the team / tribe members happy. So minor correction, I wasn't actually a tribe lead so much as a chapter lead for Agile coaches. So I led a team of coaches that worked across multiple tribes rather than being the directly accountable person for the tribe itself. I want to try to answer this question in a slightly different way. So in a way, the way I think about this, and I would say that this is probably quite common for most of the folks at Spotify, is to not so much think about how do I make someone happy as opposed to how do I avoid making them unhappy. So if you think about it as like, instead of me trying to do a thing that makes you happiness or gives you motivation, what I try to do is understand what are the things that would demotivate or demoralize you. The flip side of that is that you can obviously also give somebody something that they would actually enjoy to do. So kind of like, if you want people to do a good job, give them a good job to do, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't really think about it as something that I have to do, more as trying to understand and talk to people and say, hey, like, you know, what are the challenges that you're facing? How could we make this a little bit smoother or easier? But just like it is with trying to make your customers happy, you need to talk to people and you need to understand what it is that makes them tick. And yeah, be available, I think that kind of makes sense. I don't know if that's kind of a sort of a high level answer. Maybe it's a bit too vague, but yeah, I don't think that there's so much that you can go out and directly apply motivation or happiness to people. Hopefully that answers your question. Cool. And next one we have, does Spotify use flight levels? What do you think, Klaus?
Maybe they don't call it flight levels. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I just know that
I think
that's telling me.
Yeah. So I think that's how I would think about it. And I mean, I think also it's an interesting thing when you talk about any company, it doesn't have to be Spotify, it could be any company in the world. If you say, hey, by the way, like this company uses that thing, probably it's not every single person in the company that's doing it exactly the same way. There's usually quite a lot of variety. In the areas where I was working, we were doing quite a lot of stuff that looks very similar to flight levels. So building level 2 and level 3 boards, focusing on interactions, and trying to connect things around the company. Did I hear people calling it flight levels? I don't think so. Did I use the word flight levels? Yes. And that was mostly to try to get people to kind of connect with a broader sort of concept of thinking about things at a level above the team. Yeah. So in its sort of purest sense, I would say kind of, but yeah, it's sort of a difficult one to say. Are people running around talking about flight levels? Not a lot, but are they doing something quite similar? Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question. Cool. Then we have, in flight levels, I see no design like value stream. Such concept is useful to optimize the interaction structure on level 2 and 3. Sounds like something for flight level development.
Do I understand this?
I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, but the mention of value streams makes me wonder, because I think part of the point of using a flight level, especially or a flight level, specifically level 2 and 3, is to try to actually understand the value stream. And so maybe we don't talk about specifically things like value streams. We don't necessarily use that exact phrasing, but the idea is that we're trying to deliver value from, you know, some set of things that need to be done in order to deliver value for a customer, which at least to my understanding is a value stream. So I would say that quite a lot of the assumptions of flight levels is that we're actually trying to optimize for something like a value stream.
Exactly.
Rather than just, you know, I finished my piece of coding over here and we still have to do the testing, and the copy is not done and the design is not finished and nobody's ready to actually give it to the customer.
Yeah, and so we've seen the flight level architecture before. So whenever I see a box in this flight levels architecture, behind the box is a value stream for me. So like there was this dealer box and 6 teams were coordinating there. For me, this dealer box is a value stream, a coordination point. So we coordinate teams across the value stream. That's the whole point behind flight level 2, actually. So yeah. Yeah.
I'd be interested to know if that's answering your question, Gabriel. Maybe you can type something in chat and see if there's something more behind that, and we can elaborate a bit further. Cool.
I'm also looking at the chat. Cliff, you are multitasking hero.
I have 2 screens.
Yeah, same here.
Cool. Next up we have, do you see flight levels as a framework or a kind of meta framework, which it sounds more likely to me. I feel it's somewhere between a principle and a viable framework.
Yeah, I personally wouldn't call it a framework. So I would call it more like a thinking model. And I guess that's because that's where it came from. So, I mean, I've written the book, Rethinking Agile, and after the book, a lot of people are talking about flight levels and everything. For me, it was never something like a framework. So when I was working with customers, there was this problem like, okay, there are 2,000 people running around. So what boards do we need to build? And I started to scribble around some boxes and connected them and build up some lines. And that's what we call today a flight levels architecture. But this was nothing else than it emerged out of what I actually had to do, because I need to understand the context, and that helped me. Then there was this other situation where there was a workshop, like they were like, yeah, we have a lot of these boards now, but we can't generate any value. So we brought all the boards in one room, and there was a work item, and we were like, okay, how do you somehow pull this work item through your boards in order to generate value for the customer? And it was totally not possible in 0% of the cases that the one work item was flowing across all these boards. So this is where something like flight items and flight routes were born. But again, it's nothing else than a thinking tool. It helps you to connect the dots. So I wouldn't call it a framework. Maybe it's something like a meta framework, I don't know. But it's really like, it helps you understand your organizational context. It helps you to, prohibit is the wrong word. You know, I'm not an English native speaker, but it helps you to avoid, that's the word I was using. It helps you to avoid local optimization in the end, kind of. Cliff, what do you think? Anything to add?
No, I think you've covered everything. I think that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah. I would emphasize just that piece of like, I think very often when I've seen companies and I mean, not just companies, but people in general, is that we tend to do solutioning rather than problem solving. So we've come up with an idea of something we want to implement or something we want to change, but we haven't really looked more broadly at the system and said like, what is actually the sort of limiting factor or the key things that would actually help, improve performance. And so we end up with things where we say like, okay, well, we're going to change this or restructure that or implement some new tool or whatever. But in actual fact, everyone else in the organization is doing that. And so we have thousands and thousands of changes, all overloading everything. That's basically, folks are busy trying to do some work and now they've got all of these changes there. And what we really want to do with flight levels is ask the question of like, what changes are the most important to make? Where should we start? And try to coordinate the change efforts. So creating focus on specific parts of the change, rather than trying to say, here are 250 things that we should change, let's try to do all of them at the same time. Because just like we have, a whip limit challenge in most of our work, we want to try to have this. I joked about it before and called it a SIP or change in process limit.
Yeah.
But this idea of trying to limit the number of changes you're making at a time, because otherwise it just becomes chaos as well. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's say that this one is done, I think, and we can take the next one. It says, I love the idea of a strategy board. My org has 50 plus products. Is it okay to have several strategy boards? One board would get very busy.
Yes, definitely yes. And actually, in the rarest case, I see an organization with only one strategy board. So there are so many. So let me put it that way. In the best case, there is a strategy board connected to each flight level 2 board, because a flight level 2 somehow represents a value stream, like something where you make your customers happy, kind of. And maybe I have a strategy for this. So there's something like the company strategy. Then we have a company strategy board. Then we probably have different, I don't know, branches in different countries. So we have another strategy board for this, or multiple strategy boards for this. And we probably have multiple products. So we have a strategy board for, I don't know, our group of products and for the individual products. But it all comes down to, what's the problem we want to solve? What's the problem we want to solve? And how do we actually think, do the strategy boards help us in achieving what we want to achieve? And this is again, in the flight levels architecture, if you go through this exercise, you will find out what strategy boards you actually need. But the short answer is yes, in most of the cases, you have multiple strategy boards.
Cool.
That's okay. What
Sweet.
problem is flight level seeking to? Oh, sorry.
So we have about 3 minutes left, which I think is probably not enough time to answer another question in detail and close and ask for feedback and so on. I wanted to maybe just wrap up a little bit. Klaus, I wondered if there was anything that you wanted to say before I close.
No.
That's a good one. Cool. Maybe in the meantime, you can put the feedback poll up, and then I can just share out the link. But yeah, I wanted to just thank everybody for coming. It's been cool to hang out with you and answer your questions. We're experimenting, as I said, with this format, and we will be running more of these in the future. We actually have one scheduled again for next week, although it's in sort of a time zone that suits the American side of the world and South America as well, a little bit easier. But feel free to join if you find that time is good for you. You can find all of the information on flightlevelsacademy.com, and of course jump on Twitter, speak to us there and have conversations. And yeah, if you would be able to give us some feedback, I just posted a link. There is a poll everywhere link. Just give us some answers to your question, give us a rating, tell us what did you think, and any kind of tips or recommendations for improvement, and we will take it on board for the next time. Yeah, from my side, I say thank you very much for coming. Yeah,
thank you very much, and I hope we could generate a little bit of value, at least. As Cliff said, it's our very first time that we are doing something like this, so please write down what we can improve, but we really want to do it more often, and we want to improve along what we are doing here. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Bye.